Okay, so I'm gonna again approach the topic of conceptuality, thought, conceptuality, and belief when we're talking about this awakening thing. And again, I do like a little disclaimer here, and what I'm going to draw a distinction again between certain types of certain stages of this awakening process. I'm going to draw a distinction between certain stages of this, but I'll say that in no way is this going to be a value judgment directed towards anyone who falls into any of these categories or stages, because I've been through them all, and a lot of you who are watching this have been through them as well. And a lot of you who are watching this who have moved out of the limited conceptual version of this, have moved past or let go of the conceptual understanding, are going to be able to clearly see what I'm talking about here. Those of you who are still leaning heavily on the conceptual side of this, which is fine, this might be confusing, or it might seem elusive, or you might struggle to kind of see past this, what I'm talking about, from a conceptual point of view. And I'm gonna talk about both. So what is a concept when we're talking about our experience? What is conceptual and what is direct? And I'm always talking about direct experience, your immediate, including thought, which this is the confusing part. So something conceptual is something that is not in your experience right now, immediately, right now. So for example, what's seen, the sound, the sensation, and the thought. So what's a concept is it's always going to be thought. Concept is thought. And it's always going to be something that's not in your experience right now, something that's somewhere else, another time in the past. It's something that's added to our direct experience. It's a complexity in mind that is elaborating in some way on something in our direct experience. And the nature of that is dissociative. So if I move into a conceptual reality of 3 hours in the future when I get to work, I'm dissociating from my immediate experience in doing that. So I'll point to this directly, and I've said this a few times. In the comments you'll see, and when I talk to people directly through email and so on, you'll see a division between those who are at a stage where they've moved past the conceptual version of this, and those people will talk about their immediate experience or talk about their recent experience, They're talking about their own direct experience. That's what they are interested in communicating about. Those who are approaching this from a kind of mind-based conceptual point of view will be talking about something that's not their immediate experience. So basically anything that we can talk about, anything I can say to you, or anything anyone can say here in the comments, or say to me, or communicate to me through email, by default is always a description of your or that person's experience. What I'm talking to you about is always by default a description of my own experience. It can't be anything other than that. It's when we believe that so it'll either be a description of a thought experience, and there might be some belief in there. So I believe that, and it'll usually be focused on, it'll be quite personal, or it'll be in time. So it'll be like, I believe awakening means this, or I believe this teacher is talking about this. That's a description of a thought experience. That thought experience happens directly. Thought experience is always direct, it's always immediate. It always happens now, but that a person who's saying that is saying, I experience a thought that says this teacher's talking about this, or awakening means this, and I believe that. So this, and the belief there is that thought experience you're having now refers to an actually existing objective reality independent of that thought. And that's what I would call mind identification. It's rigid, and there's doubt in it. There's, the extreme version of this, who might even be trying to figure out what other people's experience is, or suggesting that we know what other people's experience is more clearly than they do. That would be like the extreme form of this. But most of the comments recently are descriptions of that person's own experience, because I can only ever talk about my own experience. If I know that or not, I can only ever talk about my own experience. And when you move past the conceptual side of this, that becomes clear in yourself, but it also becomes clear, what I described there, everything is a description of your own experience. That also becomes clear to you as well, because you see through the reality of what those thoughts are suggesting in terms of concept and belief. You see that they don't actually refer to an actually existing real objective reality that's fixed, that exists out with those thoughts. That's obvious, because all there is what's here. That's what we're talking about with awakening direct experience. All there is what's here immediately. The identification comes when we believe in and identify with the content of that direct experience of thoughts. So a conceptual thought appears now. I can either identify with that, believe in that, or in which I'm believing in the reality of what that thought is talking about, referring to an actually existing objective reality outside that thought that refers to something real, or I can see it as just a thought, in which case I'm disidentifying from that thought. See how this is confusing? See how language fails? Language is limited. And the confusion comes in large part because I'm using the dualistic framework of language, which is limited to subject and object. What we're doing here, which is what's difficult about pointing, is we're using that framework to point to something that's not conceptual. So what I'm doing always is using concepts, language, which is always going to be the description of my own experience by default, to point to something in all of our experience that's not conceptual. At a certain point in this, and that's why this initial awakening, this initial movement, Kensho or stream entry or whatever you'd like to call it, this initial movement and awakening, this initial non-conceptual recognition is so important. Up until that point, we're always going to be holding on to a conceptual version of this, and it's going to be confusing. Like this whole pointing style, all the pointing styles, some are more simple and effective than others. So some of those what was I saying there? Yeah, those pointing styles aren't going to make sense, especially when we're going towards the kind of non-dual, no-self side of things, because it's so paradoxical. If we're still wrapped up in concepts, if we've not largely let go of that, the conceptual side of things, by seeing through the subject that believes in those concepts in mind, if we've not moved out of that, so to speak, or seen through that, or let go of that, so to speak, the non-dual, no-self thing, and you know, like the radical, uncompromising non-dual message, none of that's going to make sense. Because we're going to be believing that what these people are talking about refers to some actually existing objective reality called no-self or non-dual or radical non-duality. We won't be able to see past that. So that's why I believe that's the flaw with the uncompromising non-dual message, I think, because for me it was, you know, I watched Jim Newman just after this initial awakening, and it frightened me because I could feel what it was pointing to in a non-conceptual way. Still, the concepts came in, and although I didn't fully believe in them anymore, and tried to stabilize what was being pointed to as something that's not completely paradoxical, as something it wasn't. I was trying to conceptually grasp what was being pointed to, no self, from the position of a self, and that was very uncomfortable. As realization deepened and matured, again I went back and I someone mentioned to me about Jim Newman, and I went back and I listened, and it was beautiful. And at a non-conceptual level, that I could directly in my experience connect with what he was talking about, and it was no longer frightening. It became relevant in a way. But for someone who is engaging in self-inquiry, for someone who is let's say moving out of the conceptual side of this into that initial recognition, that initial realization, that's ineffective. I think it's not appropriate. Certain aspects of what I talk about won't be appropriate as well. So what's relevant initially is if we feel like we're leaning heavily in the conceptual side of this, and we know that because we are believing in thoughts that are talking about, and those thoughts happen now, but we're believing in thoughts that are talking about something else, someone else, something that's not in your experience right now. And that will appear more interesting than our immediate experience. The mind's not interested in this because it can't theorise and talk about it. It has to go somewhere else. It has to go and talk about a theory about awakening that's not here. We have to bounce back up into the mind, and there's conflict in that, there's confusion in that, there's strong emotion attached to these concepts and belief. So if that's the case, what's appropriate is self-inquiry. What's appropriate is a form of meditation that's going to bring our attention to the immediate, to this sense of immediate conscious present aliveness that is simple, that isn't conceptual. A form of meditation that quiets the mind such that we can effectively inquire. We don't need to worry about no self, because that's later on down the line, so to speak. That's after this realization, this initial non-conceptual recognition deepens and matures to a large extent. So for those of you who are inclined to frame this conceptually, what you're going to be struggling with about what I'm talking about is the distinction between the direct experience of thought and the suggested conceptual content of thought, what the thought is talking about versus what the thought actually is, immediately and directly. That's what to focus on here. That's what's going to free us from the bondage of conceptuality, the bondage of identification and belief with conceptual thought. And we do that through self-inquiry. That might not be the case now, though. We might have to exhaust the conceptual side of this to a great extent before we're ready to let go of those concepts, because the concepts give us something to hold on to. They give us something that makes sense to that subjective separate position. They give us security, predictability, dependability. I would say it's not true. Security, predictability, dependability. It's not true stability. It's not true peace or understanding. But it does that. It gives us the illusion of that from that subjective position, and letting go of that is hard. It takes it doesn't feel safe if we're still attached to the concepts. That's why a lot of you watching this who have maybe had that initial opening into the non-conceptual nature of experience, that have kind of moved out of the concepts a bit, it's going to seem weird that even though I've explained this lots of times, even though I've put it into words clearly, if you're still attached to the concepts, if you're still identified with those concepts, that you can't hear what I'm saying. It's weird. It's like it just goes over the head. It's like it doesn't land. And then there will be into concepts again, or there'll be like you'll see it in the comments here probably. There will be those of you who are talking about their experience, and then those of you who are talking about purely concepts, something else, someone else's experience, or some sort of philosophical idea about what this means, or what no self is, or what awakening is. It seems obvious when you've moved out of that conceptual space to a large extent, but when you're in it, you can't see it. But that's fine. That's part of this, and we've all been there at one point or another. Sometimes we just have to exhaust the limits of the conceptual understanding, such that we can see that it's limited, and we can feel that there's something else here, something else that's not dependent on or defined by concepts. And that something else is what is in our immediate experience right now. That I can add concepts to that, but it's not conceptual. It's non-conceptual, or it's pre-conceptual. So if I look at the grass over there, I can see grass, colour green, over there. Now those are labels. Those are conceptual objective language or designations, like symbolic words that represent some aspect of direct experience. But the direct experience of that which I call grass green over there is none of that. I can't talk about it. That's what I'm pointing to. I'm not pointing to the conceptual designations. I'm not pointing to belief. I'm pointing to what's before belief, what's too obvious to require belief, what's already here in the absence of belief that belief and conceptuality can't touch. I'm also talking about what the beliefs, the thoughts, the conceptuality, what those thoughts are made of, what the sensations that we feel when we start to let go of these beliefs viscerally in the body, what that's all made of immediately right now, directly in experience. It's all happening now. If we're starting to deliberate or worry between this and that, is it this or that? Does this mean this or does it mean that? We're way up into the conceptual space, and if we feel that's important, then we're believing in that. That's what I call mind identification. We're identified with the concept. What I'm saying is that doesn't matter. What matters is what's actually happening right now, the thought experience directly, that leads to that uncomfortable experience of being identified with a thought-based belief about something conceptual. So like I posted in the last video, what in your experience isn't conceptual? What in your experience isn't a thought? What part of the thought experience isn't conceptual? Bring your attention immediately here, viscerally, to this physical experience right now. Drop your attention into that. Just what's here. Nothing else. Notice that the mind starts talking, or it starts moving. It starts moving, and the direction of attention is pulled away from what's here up into a conceptual mind space. And then we start struggling with that. We're like, why is this happening? Why can't I stop that? Why can't I keep my attention here? That's all identification. That's all belief in the content of the thoughts from this subjective position. But when we see through that position of the thinker, when it becomes clear what's actually happening there immediately in direct experience to cause us to struggle with thoughts and concept and belief, then that all has the chance to die down. And then what shines through is what all of the non-dual teachers are pointing to, which isn't conceptual. I also heard a thing where, let's see if I can remember this. So it's a story about the Buddha giving a sermon, and he talks about like essentially the way I understand it, right? I'm going to paraphrase this and and I might be butchering it, but the teachings of the sense of I am, the sense of pure presence, the background substratum, the ground of being, the Brahman or whatever, the universal infinite subject, or the sense of I am. So in these teachings it said that the monks rejoiced or something, or they delighted in his words and they sang and so on. But then when Buddha gave a sermon about no self, essentially what's no self, the seeing that universal ground of being as being empty, of emptiness, and dependently originated with all other aspects of experience. That sense of I am not being separate from or inherently existing as a fundamental view, inherent view. Then it said that the monks didn't rejoice. They didn't delight in his words, and they were like angry with him or something like that. And it shows you that that's kind of like what we're describing here, with the radical message pointing directly to this no self-realization. But if we try and approach that, or if we try and use that pointing style, that tool, which is just a tool, too soon, it's disturbing, and we're gonna fight to preserve or defend our conceptual understanding, because that's giving us stability. And the no self, when we attempt to perceive that from a personal point of view, is always going to be disturbing, and we're gonna assume that it's talking about something that it's not. We can't know what that is, of course, because the position that we try and comprehend that from is no self is the realization of its absence. So we can't take a position to then subjectively observe the absence of the subject. Of course, by definition, that's not what it's talking about. And it's not talking about any sort of experience, be it a liberated experience or a dissociative experience or a depersonalized experience. It's not talking about experience. No self isn't an experience. It's not a personal quality or attainment. It's not a kind of experience. It's this. This is it. This is no self. This is no self already. It's not an experience. So any of the conceptual language that's used isn't pointing to an actually existing experience or a quality of reality or objective reality called no self. That's where we get confused, because we're taking it on conceptually. The language is just a pointing tool, to point, using concepts to point to what's not conceptual. And what's not conceptual has nothing to do with belief, because belief, again, is another concept. So let's come back to basics now then. And we'll do an inquiry simply to bring our attention to the direct experience. So focus on a point in the visual field. We're going to bring the totality of our attention into the seen world, into the looking. And we're going to focus on a specific point in our visual field. So for example, I'm looking at a bin. So I'm going to forget the labels, forget the designations. Looking at that bin, I'm going to forget what I think it is, and I'm just going to relax the aperture of attention out and back. Relax the labels of the mind that are looking to augment form and meaning and separation onto the visual experience. Relax it back, and I just keep my attention widely and simply in the visual experience. Relax the eyes. Relax the mind. So if we notice a movement of mind, that's coming in and narrating what we're doing, or monitoring this experience, talking about what's going on or what this means, we're going to direct our attention just to the substance of the thoughts, what's actually happening as the thoughts are appearing right now. What are the thoughts made of? Where are the thoughts in experience? Let's find them in our experience. Where is the thought experience right now? Look for the thoughts. If we do that, we probably notice that the thoughts kind of dissolve, disappear, and then there's a bit of stillness there. Then we can ask, what will be the next thought? And we watch the space of thought. We're attentive in the space of mind. What will be the next thought? If you're thinking now, recognize that you're thinking and come back. Now we've got a chance. This automatic function is kicking in. That automatic function is what's leading us into a conceptual narrative version of what's happening. Bring your attention straight back to the visual field and relax. What will be the next thought? Presently, attentively, right now, in immediacy. Watch for the movement of thought. Watch for the thought experience. Now we're going to close our eyes, and in that way we're getting closer to the space of thought. Is the mind moving? Is it talking? Is it giving us images, concepts, theories, or beliefs? Whatever thought is happening now, make that thought as loud as possible. Scream it in your mind. As you scream it in your mind, investigate the quality of the sound of the thought. Or what is the thought? What is that experience? What does it feel like directly? Orient directly to the thought. Become interested in what is this thought experience that's happening right now. The thought may die down a bit, and then hold, wait, what will be the next thought? Now we're gonna look at the experience of thought as it's happening right now, directly. And we're gonna look for the distinction between one thought and another one. Are there distinct, defined thoughts appearing in a linear fashion, one after another? Look for that in the direct thought experience. See if you can find the division between one thought and another thought. We might notice, now don't start talking about this in your head, but we might notice that the thought space, the substance of thought, is kind of like an unfindable, but they are homogeneous, moving substance that can move itself into the shape of anything. Words, images, sounds. So we're going to notice that homogeneous thought stuff moving around and kind of shape-shifting and taking different forms. And we're going to notice those movements as it comes up and forms into something conceptual, an image, a word, a narrative. Now we're going to consider that the substance of thought as it's moving around, when there's no thought there, that substance, that thought stuff, is still present. It's just not formed into a definable thought. We're going to notice that the thought substance itself is inherently self-aware. So we've got this inherently self-aware, homogeneous, without borders, without divisions, without form, conscious substance that can take form if it likes, but is itself formless. Now we're going to ask, what am I that is observing this? Do I feel like I'm apart from this conscious, self-aware substance of thought space? That am I outside the thought space looking in? Am I part of the thought space looking at the other part of the thought space? Can I find that conscious one in this space of thought? In this self-aware substance of conscious thought material? Look for you, the one that is aware in that thought space. And as we look for that, we might notice that the thought substance becomes more still, less dynamic. When there is very little movement of this thought substance, when the thoughts are calmed down, we can notice that what I am is here, inherently self-aware. When the thought space isn't moving, isn't dynamic, I'm here, I am inherently self-aware. inherently aware. When the thoughts are moving, again, the thoughts are known by this knowingness, this awareness, this self-awareness. So we start to see the alive, mysterious quality of thoughts morphing and moving around. Every time we look for something in it, it dissolves and turns into something else. It's slippery. We start to see thoughts as not that these solid pictures, these objective, solid things with hard borders and definition. We start to see the direct experience of thought is like an alive, constantly morphing, homogeneous material of knowingness that just can't be found in our experience. But it doesn't need to be found because it's there. Or you could say it is the basis for this experience. That is the substance in which moves and forms and morphs into the experience of subject, object and mind. So then we open our eyes and we bring our attention back to the immediate sense experience, what's seen, the sound, physical sensation, the breath, and notice the contrast between the two, the contrast between the senses, the sense experience, and this ghost-like, wispy, dreamlike experience of the thought material. So what we're doing with inquiry is we're letting that thought experience calm down, relax enough, such that our inherently alive, inherently self-aware nature confirms itself in and as experience in an undoubtable way. And it becomes clear that it doesn't have to be captured in thought from this subjective experience to be wide awake, obvious and clear. So in a way we're relaxing that distracting illusion in thought, such that we can see it doesn't need to be there. And what it's suggesting isn't actually there in the way that we believed it was. Anyway, I think that'll do for now, but I'll go for now. Let me know in the comments how you got on with the inquiry, and I'll talk to you next time.